Hello and welcome to this Michalsons webinar. I think we're expecting quite a big crowd today, and let's just give the attendees some time to come in. We're just gone through the almost 100 mark, and let's give a few people. I always in these situations picture a physical room, how we used to do this, where you'd arrive at a venue and people would come in slowly and grab a cup of coffee on the way in and have a chat to people as they arrived, and you could get a feel and an idea of where you were and get your bearings and have a few moments to also catch your breath. And it's obviously changed now in this context where many of you have probably been in meetings, you've rushed across and you're straight into this session. And that's why David, one of our attorneys, likes playing a bit of jazz at the beginning, just to calm everyone down and let everyone feel comfortable and relaxed so that then they can absorb the content. I'm not going to play jazz this morning, but take a few deep breaths, relax and focus on where you are. So my name's John Giles, and I'm the managing attorney at Michalsons, and really I've been helping organizations of various sizes to comply with complex data protection laws for many years now. You could say about 20 years, and in fact about 15 or 20 years, so a long time. I'm also joined by Zwakele Mbanjwe, one of our attorneys, and Zwakele is going to help us to coordinate some of the questions that you might be asking, try and facilitate pointing you in the right direction, giving you some links to places that you can read more or take various of the actions that we'll be talking about today. We are recording today's session, and we will be making it available to the attendees. And yeah, in terms of the session for today and what we're trying to achieve, we're really saying that, well, what we realized is that many people over the deadline, the 30th of June and the 1st of July, they first became aware of POPIA. There was a lot of noise over that time period, and a lot of people realized that actually this is a thing. Actually, it has an impact on me, and actually I need to be doing something about it. And so we decided to do this webinar to help those that are late to the party. They didn't realize what it was about, but became aware over that deadline of data protection, of POPIA, and realized that they needed to do something. And the purpose of this webinar is to help those people to work out what you're going to do. And it's tricky. I know it's not easy. We've helped and worked with many people to try and help them through this process. And it is difficult. There are lots of potential options. There are lots of different roads you could take, and it is difficult. So this webinar is about an hour, and we are really going to try and help you to decide which road to take by asking you 5 questions. And we've thought about this a lot. We've been around and around on it a lot. And in our view, these 5 questions asked in the specific order that we ask them in really do help you to determine which road to take at the end. So in this webinar, we're going to ask you a lot of questions. There are going to be many polls, but really they're centered around these 5 questions. And it kind of makes it manageable. You know, they're just these 5 questions that there are that you need to answer, and it'll get you hopefully to deciding what action you're going to take for this important issue. So I'm aware that people have lots of questions, and that also might be why you're here. We are not planning to answer lots of questions today. We do lots of Q&A sessions for the members of the Michalsons Data Protection Program, and there are other opportunities to answer questions. We also have FAQs on our website, and we answer a lot there. There's also lots of information on our website which will answer many of your questions. But please ask questions today that are relevant to today's topic. And you can do that, preferred if you did it in the Q&A box. You can see that functionality is there. We've enabled a functionality that you can see all the questions that are there. You can ask them anonymously as well if you don't want to be known. And then the other people can vote up the questions they believe are the most important. And what we'll do at the end of today's session, we'll leave about 10 minutes to answer some questions. We'll finish at 11 o'clock and we'll give about the last 10 minutes to answer some questions. But as I said, we really want to try and help people through these 5 questions, so we're not going to stop for a lot of questions. The chat box is also there. You can pop things in there if you want to talk to people. From the chat perspective, let's leave questions in the Q&A and chat for other things. All right. So Kelly, have I missed anything? Anything else to add?
Nothing yet, John. I'll be sure to remind you if you miss anything.
Okay. Perfect. So let's I'm going to share my screen and let's go straight to our website. So this is the image that we've got on our website about different roads you can take. You're at a fork in the road and you need to choose one way or the other. And there are these 5 questions that we suggest that you ask yourself. So I'm going to go down here and go through them one by one. So this page is on our website, and you can, after today, go to this page and you can watch a video on each one of these questions. So for each question, we've done a webinar before, which were about an hour in length. So there are 5 recorded webinars of an hour each. We're going to try the impossible and try and do this in 1 hour as really an overview of the 5 questions. But you might well want to then go and dive into more detail and watch these videos yourself, particularly if there are aspects that are particularly relevant to you. So today we're going to stick with the generic scenario, what applies to most organizations, and we're going to work through it like that. The other thing we've got open here is we've got our POPIA is here infographic, and there's a section here for each question. And I'll flip between those. We've also got our presentation, and I'll probably spend a bit of time looking around there. And then there's popia.co.za, which is POPIA in the form of a website if you want to read the actual law, and that can be quite useful to have a look. All right, so our first question is, must my organization comply with POPIA? And it's a good question to ask, because if you don't have to comply, then you can leave. That's it, finished. So the key aspect to this, and if I show you here, there really are 2 questions. The one is my organization domiciled in South Africa? So is it tax resident in South Africa? Is it registered in South Africa? Are you domiciled? Domicilium or domicile is a very common legal term and is a very established term. So you should be able to establish that pretty easily. So if you're domiciled in South Africa, you need to comply. It's basically as simple as that. The second question is, if you're not domiciled in South Africa, but if you process personal information in South Africa, then you need to comply. So this is relevant to a lot of foreign companies that are registered in other countries and domiciled in other places. They might not need to comply, but if they process personal information in South Africa, so not about South Africans, but in South Africa, either themselves or through a processor or an operator, then they need to comply. So that's the really simple question here. There are lots of nuances, and as I say, we spend a whole hour in a webinar going through that. But essentially, those are the key questions you have to ask yourself. And this is different to other countries. Like the GDPR is slightly different. You can be outside of South Africa, outside of Europe. You can be processing outside of Europe. But if you're providing goods or services or targeting people in the EU, you need to comply with the GDPR. South Africa doesn't work like that. It's not extraterritorial in that way. So let's go out of there and let's ask our first question or poll. So the question is simply, must my organization comply with POPIA? You've got a single choice there between those four options. And let's get a feeling for whether you think it's yes, no, or not sure. Hopefully, there are not too many of you who are not sure. So let's see where we get to. So you're going to have to stay sharp today, because there are going to be, as I say, about 7 polls coming up, which are going to help you answer these questions. All right, so let's end that poll and share the results. And overwhelmingly, you saying yes, which is understandable. Most people who've realized no are not here. So most of you do. If you're not sure, then I would suggest watching that 1-hour video, and hopefully that answers your questions, but it might be more nuanced than that. There are some really tricky questions, and we do engage with people to help them answer those questions if necessary. All right, great. So we've got that first question, and that's one of the easy ones. But I think there was somebody who said no, which means you can leave. It's the end of the road for you, which is why these are ordered, so that you kind of you don't need to ask yourself questions that are relevant to you. They're trying to sort you out as quickly as possible.
There's also something about the exemption also, John. Want to touch on that a bit?
Yes, sorry, that's a great point. I should have raised that as well. So there are some organizations that are exempt. And if, for example, there is an exemption for journalistic purposes, and there's also an exemption for law enforcement. But there's lots of material on our website about that you can read, and that can go into more detail. The bad news is that virtually nobody is exempt. So that's why not going to tackle it in much detail, because it applies to really, it's sort of 2% of people. Lots of people think, oh, I'd love to be exempt. And of course you would, but unfortunately, virtually nobody is exempt. But it might be a road worth exploring before you go on. All right, but as I said, I'm sticking with the majority of you here, and so let's keep going. All right, so the next key question is, do I understand POPIA? Do I have a high level awareness? And the reason we put it this way is that you don't need to be an expert in POPIA or data protection in order to take action. I honestly have been working in this area for 15, 20 years. I've spent hundreds of thousands of hours working on it, and I still learn things every day. You can really, it is such a vast topic with so much to it that you can bury yourself for years in trying to learn everything about it. And that's not what you need to do. You don't need to be an expert in data protection. You just need to get to know enough to be able to work out what action to take and how to protect your organization, how to manage risks of non-compliance, and how to steer it through this regulatory requirement in a way that's practical, but also in a way that's effective. So there are different ways of getting a high level of awareness. If you have a look over here, this video, we go through some visual aids and some summaries about the Act. We talk about it in one sentence. And maybe it's worth me doing that quickly, a few of those things, because it can be pretty daunting. So what I would suggest you don't go and try and sign up for a certification or a course that's going to take you 20 days. You don't need to have that level of knowledge unless you're planning to make a career out of data protection. You don't need that. You need a much higher overview, and that's what this video is. So there's detail there, but to give you a flavor of what we deal with in that video, we look at the global view. We then hone in on particular laws, and we look at just POPIA. So also, this is talking about POPIA. It's not talking about data protection more generally, and it's not talking about the GDPR, for example. It's talking about South Africa's data protection law called POPIA. So in terms of the overview, to give you an idea, this is POPIA in one sentence. If you want to process personal information, there are some conditions to do it lawfully. That's basically what the law is about. If you go and read the actual act, you'll find it's very heavy going. It deals with intangible concepts, and it's really tough to read the law itself. But going back to this one sentence, it doesn't say you can't process personal information. It just says if you choose to do so, there are some conditions or principles to do it lawfully. So it's not trying to stop you from processing personal information. It recognizes there needs to be a free flow. It recognizes that organizations need to use personal data to achieve different things. And therefore, it's really just setting the rules or conditions. If we then look at a word cloud of POPIA, this is a tool generates a word cloud by counting the number of words in the act or in the document, and then the greater number of times a word appears, the bigger it is in a word cloud. So this is the whole law in front of you, and you can clearly see it's about personal information, only one kind of information, not confidential information, not other things. It's just personal information, which is basically any information that identifies a person, a living person, or an existing juristic entity where applicable. Then the other big things are the word processing is big there. You've got data subjects, pretty big. You've got responsible parties, pretty big. And essentially what it's saying is that if you want to and determine why and how to process personal information, you become the responsible party. The person to whom the information relates is the data subject. And as I said, there's some conditions to do it lawfully. There's a regulator, a new regulator that deals with this called the Information Regulator. That's their website, and they are responsible for regulating this law and this issue. So I think that's a very quick overview of some of the components of it. So let's go to a poll and let's ask this question, which is, how aware are you of POPIA and data protection? And let's get a feel for your level of awareness. And obviously those who know very little, I would recommend that you go and watch that video on our website. It's going to definitely in an hour raise your level a lot more. So the other important thing to remember is that the fourth one, which is I know nothing, you've got to say it like Manuel from Fawlty Towers. If any of you remember Fawlty Towers, I know nothing. That's the one that you choose in that scenario. But otherwise, it'll be really interesting to see the level of awareness. I'm not expecting many of you to know a lot about it. This is in many ways an entry-level webinar for those who are new to POPIA. It'll be interesting to see. So let's end the poll there and sharing those results. So by far, most of you either have a high level awareness or just know enough to be dangerous. I know nothing is only a couple of people. And a few are saying, I don't know what I don't know. And I think that last one is actually quite relevant. Many people, they're just not aware of the extent and the depth of the discussion. And it's playing out every day. The most current example of this is that Apple have announced that they're going to be scanning photographs on iPhones before those images are uploaded to iCloud, and they're looking for child pornography images, and they're going to report people to law enforcement before they get uploaded to iCloud. Now, this is a massive privacy debate because on the one hand, you're protecting children. On the other hand, you're potentially opening a backdoor surveillance mechanism to the iPhone, to governments and to law enforcement and other people. And it's a classic issue of balancing rights and interests. And it's a massive debate that's happening right now globally. So privacy and data protection is one of the major issues globally that everyone's grappling with in different contexts. All right, so if you said that you know just enough to be dangerous, I would suggest that you go and watch that video of ours on the website and learn a bit more about some of the high-level issues.
And just to touch on something as well, John, I think it's also, not noteworthy to say at this point is that there's a lot of information in a lot of places. I'm on LinkedIn and I know how, especially leading up to the deadline and post-deadline, there was so many POPIA-related, posts. I know from my emails as well, there were so many things that, POPI here, POPI there, are we popping popcorn? There was just a lot going on. I think it's just also important at this stage to say that when we talk about awareness, it's about, I think, having a focused or a laser focus on what affects you. And I like what you said there, I think about that point about I don't know what I don't know, is that there's I think when I think about it, there's two classes of information. There's information that helps me achieve certain goals that I have now. And then there's interest information, things that are interesting to me, things that, move the conversation forward that, I might want to pitch an opinion about during a drink amongst friends. And a lot of the information that you're going to see on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on your WhatsApp groups is going to be coffee table information. The information you want to focus on and what we really are trying to help you with is the information that helps you achieve your goals. And you'll start to realize that that's not an awful lot. That's quite specific. And yeah, we've got a couple of tools that can help you on that journey.
I think that's a great point. This topic is a rabbit hole. You can start, and if you don't know what you're trying to look for, you can spend days and days and days reading, watching videos, and Zwakele makes a great point. There's lots on the web that's just not relevant for you. And the great example there is that a lot of what's written on the internet is for large organizations, and you might be a small organization, and it's just not relevant for you. There's no such thing as one size fits all when it comes to data protection. And it's a really good point. The other good point you make, Zwakele, is that around the deadline, there were those messages on WhatsApp. There were also lots of emails about, we have you on our mailing list, you can opt out if you want, those sorts of emails. 90% of those emails were basically spam. They were like a virus. They weren't necessary. And what happened is that one person sent it, and then the next person who received it thought, ooh, that looks like a good idea. I think I should send that out too. So then they sent that to all their customers, and then those customers saw them and thought, oh, I better send it too. And they spread like a virus. And really, most of them weren't necessary. And it is ironic. It happened with the GDPR deadline as well, that a law that's meant to reduce spam, reduce communications, actually, there was a lot of spam, if you like, about the law stopping spam, which is obviously crazy. Okay, great. And then just to touch on Philip's question around processing our own personal data. No, then that isn't personal data. Data protection, it's about processing someone else's personal data. The data subject is always somebody external. The rules don't apply if you're processing your own personal data. So just to tackle that one now. And then Anonymous has asked a question around the information regulator, and that they keep insisting on that you can only process with prior consent. And that really is not true. POPIA is not consent driven. As a general rule, you do not need consent from a data subject to process their information. It's not just the regulator. There are many people who keep saying this, and it's not true. The way to look at it is that you don't need a data subject's consent to process, except there are some cases where you do. And a great example is if you want to email market to people you don't know, prospects, you need their opt-in consent to do that. In a scenario where you're processing children's information, one way of doing it lawfully, and there are many, the one way is to get consent of a competent person. So really there are very few instances where you have to get consent. It's an option, but there are very few where you have to. POPIA is not consent driven. It's not all about consent. All right, let's, Zwakele, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think maybe whilst you're on that, John, because I also see a couple of questions, particularly on the idea of processing coming up, is maybe just touch on, you know, what is processing, what is considered processing, you know, from, you know, what the act says all the way to like the nuances and like day to day in our businesses, and maybe and I think also that I want to touch on Philip's question around that. You know, your information is not PI, but when you're in an organization and you have staff, for example, and their information could, you know, is PI, but there are, you know, certain ways that you can deal with that. And by PI, I mean personal information.
Yeah, good point. I think what we should do, let's leave the questions regarding processing for the impact, because I think they fit nicely under that question. And I do see there are a couple of others coming through, but I'll try and slot them in the relevant place. All right, and yeah, please voting the questions up or down. It really helps us to work out which questions you want answered and which ones we should tackle, so that's great. So the next question that we're going to ask is this one, which is, who is responsible for POPIA in my organization? You can also see it's over here. And here's the video that goes into detail about the role of the information officer. Because essentially it is the information officer who is responsible for this issue in your organization. And actually, I want to run a quick poll here as well before we start this section. So if you wouldn't mind quickly just letting us know, what is your role in the organization? This is, I'm going to ask another one about whether you're the right person to be responsible for this, but what's your current role in the organization? It would be very interesting to find that out so that we know where to pitch this. So the head of the organization for a private body is by default the information officer, and you can't escape that. You are it. It's PIA that did that, and about 20 years ago it did that. And so you are the default information officer, and that's why the questions differentiate between the default and the designated information officer as the third option, because the head of the organization can designate somebody else to be the information officer. So the head remains accountable, but they can designate the responsibility to somebody else. That person must be an employee in the organization, and that's possible. So it's always interesting to see who we've got on the call. And so if we share the results, we've got quite a few people who are the head. We've got some governing body members. We've got a lot of designated information officers. And we've got a few DPOs, some in-house legal and some compliance, which is very interesting and useful. So it looks like many of you are still deciding whether you are the right person to be responsible for this. And so this section will be particularly relevant for you. And I'll run another poll after explaining a bit, which will help you to answer this question. So sure, there's a lot to talk about here. And let's go out of here. So we tackle this issue in our section talking about planning, because for us, getting governance right is where you start. And the information officer is such an important person to be involved from the beginning, because they are ultimately responsible. If you look at what the law says, they are the person who are responsible. So as I said, by default, it's the head of the organization. They cannot escape that. They are it. It's just the way it is. That's what the law says. So you firstly need to know who is the head, who is your default information officer. Then in terms of responsibilities, I'm not going to go into the detail here, but under POPIA, this is what they need to do. They need to encourage compliance with POPIA. They need to create the POPIA manual. And from 1 January 2022, nobody, no public or private body is exempt. Everybody needs a manual from 1 January 2022. Then the information officer must also evaluate and approve requests. And then under POPIA, they have significant responsibilities, but many people forget that the information officer is both POPIA and POPIA. But POPIA, there are lots of responsibilities, and here's a list of some of them here. With the most important being that they are ultimately responsible for ensuring compliance. This number 4. They must ensure compliance by the body with the provisions of the Act. So the information officer is very much the responsible person and the key person. They should be a champion and not the police in our view. And the key questions then become, well, who in our organization should it be? We go through various things in the videos, maybe to show you here, there are various different structures. The one is to have the head as the default and then designate one information officer, which is the easiest. That person's then responsible for both, and they have to be an employee of the organization, and they have to be in South Africa. I know there are lots of questions about that, but yeah, I don't want to get too caught up in that because that's often only a small percentage of people that applies to. So you can have many. You can have one that deals with POPIA and one that deals with POPIA. You can have many, and some organizations do have lots. The other key thing here is that you need to appoint these people in writing, and we suggest that you do it in the form of a letter. You must name them in your POPIA manual, and then you need to register them with the information regulator, and they've created a portal where you can register your information officer. In theory, you can register with the portal. The problem is at the moment, the portal that they created is very problematic. It has lots of issues. They're aware of it. And if you've tried, you probably can't. The regulator said they're working on fixing the challenges, and we don't know how long it's going to be. They've given us no timeline. We've been suggesting to people to wait until the portal is fixed and then register your information officer. But we increasingly are thinking it could take a long time to fix the portal. And therefore, if you want to be safe, you really should register your information officer manually. And by that, what we mean is fill in the forms and email them to the regulator. Don't post them, email them to the regulator. The regulator has said they processed everything that's in their mailbox, and they are processing those applications or registrations. So if you want to be safe, I would register them with the regulator by emailing them the form, or you could wait for the portal. They're not going to take action against anyone who failed to register because the portal was down. They've confirmed that and said that. All right, so
just a quick one there. I was like, so who do I register? Do I register my default? Do I register my appointed? Do I register my deputy? Or do I register them all?
Pretty much you register them all. You have to register the default and the designated. We prefer the term of a designated information officer rather than a deputy information officer, because everyone wants to talk to the sheriff and no one wants to talk to the deputy. So you undermine the person by calling them a deputy information officer. All right, so let's go to our polls. I'm just conscious of time as well. And let's ask this question. So am I the right person to be responsible for this? It'll be interesting to see your views on this. It's always nice when we've got a crowd, because these polls give you a really good snapshot of how people are feeling about it and where people are generally about it. I know there are lots of questions around information officers. We're not going to have time to tackle all of those today. Yeah, but we've got lots of information on our website about information officers, and you can read about it there. We've got lots of FAQs on our website. So let's end the poll there and share the results. So 34% of you are it, and you're happy to be it, which is great news. 36% are it, but you don't want to be it. It's only because you have to. I'm not sure whether you are the default or the designated, but obviously if you're the default, then you should be delegating it to someone else or designating someone else to do it. So no, it's not me who is responsible. So 22% of you are that. I mean, this webinar really is designed for who's responsible. And I think that a really important point is that often what we find is that we engage with a company, or a company is working on this issue, but the information officer is not involved. And that's why it's right at the beginning of the action we propose you take, is you've got to get governance right. Because the information officer has to be involved. The person who's the key person responsible needs to know they're responsible or accountable. You could have split that, but they have to be involved from the beginning. Then some of you have said, no, I've designated someone else. So that tells me that there's some default information officers here who've designated information officer, but still wanting to get some guidance and some views on where to go. So that's interesting. Great. Thank you for those answers. All right, let's, Zwakele, do you think we should tackle any questions related to this, or?
No, I think what I'm going to do, John, is that I'm going to pop up a couple of links from our website and a couple of our posts, and I think a lot of the questions will be dealt with, because you've really done a lot of work on just helping to clarify these questions. So look out for those, guys.
Okay, great. So I see Everett's question is very high up on the list, which related to the consent question. So let's tackle that one quickly. Yeah, so POPIA doesn't specifically mention cookies, but basically the law in South Africa is the same as it is in Europe. If you're using cookies for marketing purposes, because of Section 69 and the way it's worded, you do need consent for marketing cookies. And therefore, you basically need to implement a cookie notice and cookie policy in South Africa the same way as you need to do in Europe. So that's one of the exceptions. POPIA is not consent driven, but if you're going to be using cookies for the purposes of marketing and direct marketing, it is a form of electronic communication, and therefore it's to people you don't know, and therefore you need to have consent. So it's one of the exceptions. All right, let's go on to the next question. All right, so the next question is, what is the impact on my organization? Sure. Now, again, this is an hour-long presentation, which we're going to do in 5 minutes. And I'm going to zip across here to have a look. And we deal with it under the introduction because it is such an important thing for you to establish. What is the impact on my organization? Because depending on the impact, you have to do very, very different things. So is the impact high, medium, or low? And this is different to the size of your organization. It's not so in other words, you get a small organization that has a very high impact. You can have a very large organization with a low impact. So actually, let's ask a quick poll here. Before we get to what the impact is, let's ask you, what size is your organization, because that's one of the factors in determining the impact. So if you wouldn't mind answering that quickly, it's just based on the number of employees. So really easy to pick. The reason it's number of employees is that those thresholds have been used globally and in South Africa to provide certain exemptions, and you're only required to do certain things over certain amounts. So it's really interesting to see our audience today, and I'm going to end it there and share the results. So most of you are small, which is interesting, and then many medium and large as well. So just because you're small doesn't mean the impact is low. A great example here is that you might be a small organization that processes very little personal information, like a barber or a hairdresser or a coffee shop. Those are scenarios of small, very low impact organizations, and they have virtually nothing to do for POPIA. And Swakeli will pop in the chat box an article we wrote for small, low impact organizations. And there are a list of 5 or 6 things you can do there. And that's what we would suggest you do. We don't suggest you do anything else, because that's enough for you. It's such a minor issue for you. Don't spend more time and effort thinking about it or worrying about it. There's 5 or 6 things you can do there, and that will solve majority of the issues and the problems. But for medium and large organizations, generally there's more to do. And also to remember that you can have a small organization, think of a company with 5 employees, but what you do is you build profiles on data subjects and you sell lists to direct marketers. The impact on you is massive. And therefore you're small, but a very, very high impact. So let's look a bit more at some of the factors. So the one question is, well, what's your organization's role? Are you a responsible party or an operator? In other words, do you process personal information for other organizations? If you do process a lot of personal information for other organizations, the impact's going to be significant. If you're the responsible party and you're processing a lot of personal information about data subjects, the impact's going to be significant. The other question you can ask yourself is, well, what kind of information do we process? And here, if you're processing lots of children's information or lots of special personal information, which includes things like health, race, biometric information, financial information, gender, that sort of information, then you're going to have a much higher impact because that's regarded as special personal information. And then if your customers are natural persons, the impact's going to be higher. And so the classic impact is somebody who's got hundreds of thousands of natural persons or humans as their customers, and they process lots of personal data about them, including special personal information, including bank account numbers. And so banks, healthcare providers, medical aids, medical schemes, direct marketers, financial service providers are all classic examples of high impact organizations.
And maybe,
in some
maybe John, whilst he's on that, maybe you can talk about the COVID list registries that we sign when we go into different places.
Yeah, so that's a classic example of an activity where you're processing personal information. And there is guidance related to that issue on our website. The regulators published some guidance as well, and regulators and authorities around the world have. But that's still quite an isolated example. If you think of a coffee shop, you've got that list that's there. You need to apply the principles to that specific scenario. But it's reasonably simple to do. It's still not a major issue. There's some key things you can do, like obviously keep the list secure, only use it for the purpose that it was intended for. Don't use it for other purposes. So don't use the list that's there to direct market to people. They gave that information for COVID purposes, not for you to send them WhatsApps or SMSs or emails about your latest coffee special. So yeah, it's a great example of processing and is an important one to deal with, but is not, doesn't push you into a high impact area in my view. Then some people have very few customers. They only have juristic persons as customers. Take a mine, for example, that has 5 large banks that they sell their gold to, but they've got hundreds of thousands of employees, and those employees, they've got detailed health-related information about them. Their impact is on that side, not related to customers, but about employees. And then the more suppliers and processors you have, people processing for you, the impact also increases there. And then the other question is around what laws you need to comply with. The more you multi-jurisdictional, the more you're going to have to comply with multiple data protection laws, the more tricky it becomes and the impact is increased. So let's stop that there and let's run a poll and ask you what you think the impact is on your organization. So I know that's been quick and I haven't given you a lot of factors, but again, there is a video on our website that goes through that in a lot of detail, and you can get a really good idea of what the impact is on your specific organization. So obviously, the higher the impact, the more action you're going to have to take. So the worst scenario to be in is to be a large organization with a high impact. There is, unfortunately, a lot of work that you need to do. If you are at a large organization with a low impact, then there's still significant work, but a lot less to do, but there is still work. The size definitely will have an impact on you. So let's end that poll there and share the results. So most of you are saying it's a high impact. Very few of you are saying that you're not sure, which is a good thing. So a good point here is that Michalsons, we offer a complimentary or free organizational impact assessment. What it entails is you answer a questionnaire which shouldn't take you longer than 5 minutes. We then will have a look at that and get back to you with an assessment of your organization as to what we believe the impact is. And sometimes for some organizations, we set up a call to discuss that impact in more detail. What a trend is that I found is that people often think the impact is high, and it actually isn't. It's more medium or low. And so often through that process, we help people to work out that actually it's not as bad as they thought it was. But so if you do want to do that organizational impact assessment, you can do it. I see Zwakele has popped the link in the chat box there for you, and you can read more about it and do that assessment. It is free of charge. There's no charge for that. But it looks like most of you know that you're high, medium, or low, which means that very few of you will need to do that impact assessment. You already know what that position is. All right, let's see, time is marching on. So let's go to the next aspect of today. So the last aspect is, okay, so what are my organization's next steps? What are we going to do about this? And very briefly, if we zoom out to here, some really key points about this is that data protection is not an event, it's a journey. It's an ongoing thing that you're going to have to do. Complying with POPIA is not something you finish. It's definitely a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's very difficult to do this on your own. It's possible, but it's very hard. And so the two ways that Michalsons helps people is, the first is that we have a data protection program that you can join. Our program is essentially designed to empower you with the knowledge, tools, and resources that you need in order to take action yourself. So we're training you to do the running yourself. It's like a training program. It's designed to make you fitter and help you to get to where you need to be. We've got one for large, medium, and small organizations, and we've also got lenses for different kinds of organizations. And those help to contextualize the topic for different audiences, because there's no such thing as a one size fits all. So you can find out more about our programs. Wakeli can maybe drop a link into the chat box about our program. But the other option is that you can consult with us as a specialist. And these are not one or the other. It's often both scenarios. And many people join our program and consult with us and consult with other people. There are many people that are required to solve this problem. A great example is that there are information security consultants who are specialists in information security, the technical components of it. That's not what we do. And so is a good example of where you need to consult with different people. But you can consult with us as a specialist. It's one-on-one service where we would specifically help you. We're like this incredible athlete at the front here who's wearing the red pants. That would be Michalsons, who are doing the running for you and jumping over the hurdles, the really difficult things. And we're happy to play that role. Obviously, the more we're working on a one-on-one basis, then the costs increase, and that's the more expensive option. Our program is just a monthly fee, and you can stay for as long or as short as you want. Consulting with us as a specialist, generally we can give you an estimate of what our fees will be, or we can work on a retainer basis. And sometimes it's a combination of the two. Some organizations join our program and are able to do everything that they need to do through joining the program. So let's run up. Yes, okay.
So maybe you can also just touch on, because I've seen on LinkedIn and kind of sites as well where people are talking about certification and all of that. Can we help in any way in that sense? And do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, so there's no such thing as POPIA certified. You can't be certified compliant with POPIA. There just isn't such a thing. We do offer certifications through our program. The one is we certify information officers who have achieved certain criteria. And we also provide a POPIA ready seal to organizations that have achieved certain requirements. But they're not a certification that you are POPIA compliant. They are something less than that, but something that can help. All right, so let's run a poll here. And the question that I'm wanting to ask is, what are your next steps? And note that these are multiple choices. So you can choose one, you can choose many of them. But you've got to take some action. And the question is, what action are you planning to take next? And as I often say, is that at Michalsons, we really value feedback, because we believe feedback is the food of champions. So it'll be really interesting to see what your thoughts are here. And please be honest. It'll be interesting to see what your thoughts are. Yeah, interesting to see what your answers are. Sorry, they're quite long questions and answers, and there's quite a lot to go through there. But yeah, if you could spend a bit of time there, would be great. All right, so while, well, actually, let's leave that there. I think that's enough for that, and we share the results. So some of you are planning to join a program. Some of you are going to consult with Michalsons. Some are going to consult with other specialists, which you need multiple people to help you with this. So that's no problem at all. Very happy to do that organizational impact assessment for people, and you're welcome to complete that and do that. There is a lot of information on our website, and you're welcome to watch the videos and read more on our website. We do really try and empower people through that mechanism and make the law accessible. And then, yeah, there are a few people who are going to do the bare minimum and wait and see. I think that's possibly not a terrible strategy. For me, the bare minimum are things like appoint and register your information officer, determine whether you need prior authorization before sort of December this year, and apply for prior authorization if you need it. There's information on our website about that. Yeah, do some of the quick wins. There are lots of quick wins that are obvious, like ensuring that everyone uses a password manager in your organization, and yeah, protecting account numbers would be some of the top of my head. But so, Kelly, should we go to some questions?
Sure, John. Do you wanna, I think there's quite a lot of questions here. I've tried to put some on the link, but maybe if you can touch on cross-border transfer. I think there are some people who are want to a bit more information about, what's the impact of cross-border transfer to other organizations, and also within, I think for multinational organizations as well, or businesses that have multiple offices. Does POPI impact that?
Yes, it does. I mean, it's a long answer, but essentially it's section 72 of POPIA says you can't transfer personal data from South Africa to another country unless it's going to be protected where it's going. Essentially, that's what it's about, because what would just happen is that if we protected personal data in South Africa, people would go, oh, well, I'm just going to move it to Mozambique and do whatever I want. So the law says you can't transfer it across the border unless, and then it states about 7 or 8 grounds of unlesses, of things you can do. And there are lots of things you can do. If the country is recognized as providing adequate protection, you can transfer it there. So the whole of the EU will be recognized by the regulator as being adequate. They haven't done it yet, but they surely will. And so that you'll be able to transfer to many countries that do have adequate protection. And the UK is another example, Australia is another example, Ireland's another example. But there are many other ways that you can enable cross-border data flows. We're actually working on some material on that at the moment, and we'll be presenting that module to the members of our program quite soon as well to go into detail about that.
Thanks, John. Do you want to touch? So now I think it's open season, so I'll touch on a couple of things. John, maybe we want to touch a bit on prior authorization, what that is, who needs it. Yeah.
Perfect. So there are, the way the law works is that you, generally speaking, can process personal information, but you must be responsible in protecting it and complying with the conditions. There are only 4 high-risk processing activities where you actually are not allowed to process it until you've got prior authorization from the regulator. And they really are, there are 4 of them, and it's if you are profiling people, if you are processing criminal related information on behalf of other people, if you are credit reporting, and if you're transferring certain personal information across border, like special personal information, again, in a scenario where there are no protections, you then need to get prior authorization from the regulator. In our program, we go into detail about those 4 grounds and help people through an assessment, or help the members through an assessment to determine whether or not they need to get prior authorization. And that's a really important thing, because if you don't get prior authorization and you need it, it's a criminal offense and you could go to jail, or, which even worse, is you're gonna have to stop processing that personal data, which could bring your business to a grinding halt. So it really is an important issue that you need to tackle before December this year. The deadline is the 1st of February next year, but you've got to give the regulator time to process your application. So by December this year, you need to know whether you need it or not. And if you do need it, you then need to have applied by December.
Thanks, John. I think finally, in respect of time, sorry, there's a lot of information about direct marketing, and I will post, I will pop in a link to our post on direct marketing. But I think some of the questions that are coming up, John, are around, I think we've got a couple of people here who are responsible for certain mailing lists and must communicate to their subscribers. So it is, I think there's questions around should they be sending a notice like those that we've been spammed by? And then there's also just questions around how do they go about doing that. I know also we've got some great stuff on our program as well. So I don't know if you want to touch on that, John.
Yeah, I mean, direct marketing is a big topic and lots to talk about. But yeah, generally speaking, those emails were not required around the deadline. You can email people, you can email customers on an opt-out basis. If a customer, and a customer is somebody whose details you've obtained in the context of a product or a service. It's only if you want to start emailing new people who you don't know that you need to get their opt-in consent. So that's the easy point there. You don't need to send out a mail confirming to saying to people, well, you're on our list. Do you want to stay on the list? Here's a way to opt out. That's not necessary. You can market on an opt-out basis, provided that they're customers of yours. So, Kelly, I also see, and I see we're pretty much out of time, but in the Q&A, there's the sort of top 4 open questions that people have voted up. Maybe if I quickly try and knock those off, might be an option. So the first is, we're a small retail entity. Is a privacy policy and security safeguards sufficient? Yeah, so a privacy policy and a security statement are important parts of it, but they're not everything. There's certainly more that you should do. If you're a small retail entity, it depends if you're online or not. If you've got an online store, certainly the impact increases, and there's more that you should be doing from an online store perspective. If you're a physical retail, there's not a lot more to do. There isn't a huge amount. Then Roshan's question of if the CEO hasn't delegated, then yes, you still need to register the default. Because the regulator wants to know who to phone in an emergency. So you do have to register the default. You can't appoint an external information officer. At the moment, they do need to be an employee of the organization. The regulators hinted that they might allow you to appoint a person, an individual who's external, but not an external company. So you don't get companies that provide the service of an outsourced information officer. Yeah, we've spoken about registering the information officer. The portal is down. You can either wait for it to come back up again, or you can email the registration form to them. You can have an information officer, one for POPIA and one for POPIA. We recommend that there is one for both because they're 2 sides of the same coin. We're actually doing that webinar tomorrow for the members on the interplay between POPIA and POPIA. Yeah, I know, Colleen, the issue around the information officer being in South Africa is a challenge for many people. It really doesn't make sense and is crazy, but that's what the regulators said. Cloud services are definitely considered to be a cross-border information flow, especially you've got to work out where the server's sitting. And if it's in another country, you've definitely got a cross-border data flow happening there. But the good news there is that many of the cloud providers are situated in countries that do have adequate protection, and therefore you don't need to take any other action there. All right, so that's the top 5, and I see we're out of time. So, Kelly, anything else that you think we must definitely tackle before we sign off?
No, I think the fun is just the closing remarks are that, okay, so firstly, lots of questions, and it's good to see that people are thinking about data protection, and we've done a lot in trying to help you on this journey, especially via our program, where I think we go in a bit more detail than we've actually been able to cover in this very, very, very short masterclass on POPIA. And so please, give that a look. Go through our website, familiarize yourself in certain subjects. I think there's very few things, John, that we actually haven't written about in the website in one form or another, and not actually gone into more detail in the program. So that's a great resource that will really help you figure out some of those questions. And data protection, I think, is what you were saying, John, is that data protection is a journey. You don't get there. There's no destination. And I know a lot of people are pained to absolutely comply, but I think that's not the approach you want to take. You want to be on a journey, and there's lots of resources to help you on that journey. The regulator is doing its best to try to make sure that the right tools and components are up and running to help you then. I mean, we are here to help you as well on that journey. And there's many things because, when you go back to it, I think to the why does data protection exist? And it's really to protect personal information, protect privacy. And that's a very important right. And so if you can understand that, I think then your approach to protecting personal information then starts to be, a bit more easier. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely, it's to focus on what we're trying to do, which is protect people from harm. Great. So I hope this has helped. The 5 questions are designed to give you some structure to your inquiries and decisions on what to do next. And I look forward to engaging with you in the near future. And thank you very much for attending, Zwakele. Thank you very much for your contribution. And yeah, I wish you well on your journey and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.